Welcome to the Smart Cities Challenge experience, where we are looking forward to talking to you and having you hear a bit about what we've done in Canada in launching the Smart Cities Challenge. So our panel today will be in two parts. First, we have some esteemed Canadian thought leaders on smart cities issues, talking a little bit about the experience in Canada in sort of building and evolving our smart cities ecosystem. And then we will be joined by two of the participants, or the winners of the Smart Cities Challenge in Canada. So we'll do a bit of a switch over partway through the panel. So with no further ado, maybe I'll turn to our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Martin.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for making the time this morning to stop by and listen to our talk. I'm going to apologize just quickly. I'm a little bit gruff. I've been fighting a flu, but now that's in my rear view, and my energy's back, but I'm a little bit gruff here today. My name's Martin Canning. I'm Executive Director, Smart Cities, at a national nonprofit charity called Evergreen in Canada. And I consider myself an urbanist. I consider myself a sustainability enthusiast and a policy and program designer. And Evergreen and a host of partners, including Pamela and Jean-Noé here today, are supporting the government of Canada and working with municipalities across the country and Indigenous communities to build innovation capacity across our country. And thanks again for having us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Pamela Robinson. I'm an urban planner and I'm the director of the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Ryerson University, which is a university in downtown Toronto. For 20 years I've been studying how complex issues from the future impact Canadian cities, and I'm looking forward to talking about the Smart City Challenge today.
Hi everybody, my name is Jean-Noé Landry. I'm the Executive Director of Open North. We're Canada's leading not-for-profit organization that specializes in open data, open government, as well as open smart cities. And we're the lead technical partner for the Community Solutions Network, which is a collaboration with our friends at Evergreen and a number of different stakeholders, offering capacity building to cities of all sizes across the country on a range of different domains from a principles and ethical perspective. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Great. So to give you a bit of sense of what we're trying to do or what we've accomplished in Canada on the challenge, we'll run a short video and then we'll get into the discussion with our panelists. First video. As you can see from the video, in Canada, we're tackling the concept of smart cities in a bit of a unique way. We have reached out or encouraged communities to first think about what their most pressing challenge is. And that could be in any range of areas. And then we've asked them to come forward and develop a proposal around how data and connected technology could actually be used to solve that pressing problem in their community. So we asked communities to dream big, and a contest model helped them to do that. We put really big prizes in the window, a $50 million prize, two $10 million prizes, and one $5 million prize. 50 million is about 37 million euros, I believe, ish. And Canada is a big geographically diverse country, so our communities have very different needs. We have a lot of small communities. We only have 6 cities that have a population above 1 million, and so we really needed to do something that enabled communities to identify their needs in their ways. We had 130 applicants to the first round of the Smart Cities Challenge. We selected 20 finalists who were funded to develop the proposals further, and then 4 winners, 2 of whom are with us today and we'll be hearing about a bit later. And so, we're doing lots of neat stuff in Canada in this space. And I think Martin can give a bit of insight because he's been on the ground talking to communities about these issues and smart city capabilities. So what have you been seeing?
Sure. So in Canada, there's roughly 3,700 or more municipalities, and there's a lot of different sizes to the communities across Canada, and significant differences in demographics. So we've got a handful of large cities, we've got a whole bunch of mid-sized cities, and then a huge amount of smaller communities, rural, remote, indigenous communities across the country. So I'll try to answer the question in more of a general context that kind of touches on those different types of communities in the country. With smaller communities, I think it's a trend around the world, and we're looking. There's a trend around, concern for access, and with larger communities, I think there's a lot of focus on areas like 5G rollout and next generation networks. So there's, I think, a lot of trends that we see that around the needs of communities of all sizes. But the area that I'll really emphasize that we get feedback regularly, and it's really the focus of the program and how we hone in our capacity building work, is that there's this space of ideation and creativity that a lot of municipal staff and communities require to think through, to ideate around often bespoke solutions that communities need. Sometimes you can find solutions and solution providers that have products or services that match the needs of communities off the rack, so to speak. But there's a lot of specialization often required to match the requirements and needs of communities, municipalities, and Indigenous communities in Canada. And I'll call that a pre-RFP stage. So usually when we are talking with municipal staff and colleagues in local governments, procurement tends to come up as a priority area, a need, especially when we're talking about data and technology and smart cities. And I think there's a space on the front end of procurement around ideation in which there's a need for market interaction, pre-RFP, where problem definition really is central. And sometimes when you talk about problem definition, it seems kind of simple, like, oh, how hard is it to figure out what the problem is that we're trying to solve at a local level? But when you're engaged in government and politics and the complexities of the needs of citizens en masse, problem definition is actually very complicated, which I'm sure many people here recognize and realize and can appreciate. So where we're focusing and some of the needs and where we're seeing an interesting dynamic emerge in Canada is that early stage of ideation that problem definition is surfacing and the need for capacity supports in that space. And there's a degree of, I think, market failure on that front end of ideation and creativity that municipalities and communities are thinking through to come up with some of the kind of the innovative smart cities, technologies and processes for our communities of the future.
So Jean-Noé, you're also heavily involved in this space, and you're at the forefront hearing communities talk about some of their challenges, specifically when they're thinking about privacy and data governance and that issue of building trust.
Yeah.
How do cities build trust with their residents when they're playing in this space, and what have you seen?
Yeah, so it's a complex issue, but it's one that I think is really coming out from all the communities that we're talking about, this like fundamental issue around trust. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, the work that we're specifically doing in Canada from a capacity building perspective is based on a certain set of principles and values. So our approach is grounded in the theory of around open smart cities. And the openness element of the capacity building work that we're doing is directly aligned with the principles that the Government of Canada promoted through the Smart Cities Challenge. So a city is then able to propose ideas and its own vision for its future, but with a viewpoint to be able to collaborate as well as compete with other cities across the country. And so when a city comes to Open North through the advisory service, we want to listen actively. We want to understand, where are you coming from? What is your context? So that's why we've developed a self-assessment methodology to be able to capture that experience so that they tell us, okay, how do you think that you measure? What is your self-perception about some of those issues that you're tackling yourselves? And then we're able to provide a proposition around a learning path, okay, to be able to match their needs to the products and services that we've developed. And so to your question, Jenny, data governance and data management is a really key issue that we're seeing right now. And there's a real opportunity to network these cities because you need to be able to have a very grounded legislative and regulatory framework, but then how does that actually get implemented in real life? And so the management and the operationalization of those policies and regulations is really a big challenge. And in Canada, one of the trends that we're seeing, which I know is aligned with what we're seeing in Europe as well, is the notion of data trusts, for example. So how do you build trust around data sharing, around data collaboration, bring different types of stakeholders together around that kind of co-led kind of environment that builds trust in the data that's being collected by private sector as well as public institution. Another big topic that we're hearing is around open procurement. So how do cities like CIOs, for example, how do CIOs establish common contracting standards to be able to share data and bring more kind of market transparency and competitivity in the way that they're developing their RFP processes so that companies are able to compete across different cities more competitively. The other key issue that we're hearing is around inclusion and engagement. How do we do inclusion and engagement better? And that's something that's not just for obviously smaller cities that don't necessarily have a whole IT department, but they're concerned about bringing in residents to build that trust in the vision of the city that they want to build for the future. So that's also a key one. So it's not that we're far from AI, algorithmic transparency and governance. That's still a key concern for some of the bigger cities, but we have to be mindful of equity in the work that we're doing and inclusion in the way that we're able to connect and network cities together.
Thanks for that. Pamela, Jean-Noé touched on openness and transparency, and as you know, when we designed this particular Government of Canada program, that was a core feature. Can you talk a little bit about what the impact has been in openness and transparency in general?
So I think there are a number of key open features that are important to think about when we talk about this challenge. The first one was that all proponents, municipal governments who were applying, were required to engage with their citizens before they made their first submissions. There were 2 rounds in this competition. Round 1 had 130 participants in it. Round 2, 20 finalists received 250,000 Canadian dollars to build proposals. At both stages, municipal governments had to go out and speak to their communities and then report back on that consultation as part of their submission process. So that was interesting because what it meant was that communities were engaged in ways that made sense in their own places. And what you'll soon see when you hear from Montreal and you hear from Guelph, the proposals that won and the ones that emerged were really unique to the places that they came from. We avoided this kind of generic solution imposed on a specific place. And that's we'll let those folks talk about it, but if you're Canadian and following technology and data trends, what you'd see in the applications is that it was really easy to figure out which applications came from which communities because they were really closely tied to the work that had happened along the way. The second feature that Infrastructure Canada built into the competition was that when people applied and submitted in round 1, they had to post their applications on their municipality's website. And I just assumed when the competition was announced, I thought, oh, that's great, it'll make it easier to find. We, I think in the community of research, figured that the applications would be posted after everything was adjudicated, but that wasn't the case. They had to go up at the point of submission, and so your application wasn't complete until you posted on your municipal website. So for people like me in research, that was amazing because it gave us really easy access. But what it also meant was that there was an accountability function built into the challenge. Citizens could go look at what their municipal government submitted and check to see if the kinds of processes local governments used were actually the ones that they reflected upon. And what's interesting is that we just checked in on this. there wasn't any friction between round one and how communities engaged their public, and then the public coming back and saying, wait, what you submitted wasn't what we wanted. And so that kind of tight alignment between community values and the submission is really important, especially in a government-driven process that reflects community values. The final thing I'll say is that in terms of openness, one of the things that's really important is that this challenge, because it asked local governments to be the ones who were submitting, it really made technology and data support democratically articulated principles and goals and objectives. So this wasn't a case of vendors coming and selling technology that was really cool or sexy, but it was a case of vendors having to fit their technology into locally democratically articulated goals and principles. So those things are really important.
Thanks for that. So if there are any governments here that are thinking about running a similar challenge, what advice might we give to them as panelists? Anyone can jump in, though I suspect Pamela might want to first.
So I would really encourage you to follow the Government of Canada's lead in terms of asking your applicants to share their proposals early on. It also lets communities learn from each other, and I think this challenge was designed to have 3 rounds. We've just had an election, and we're having a cabinet shuffle this morning, so we'll find out who the new minister is that's responsible for the challenge. But if rounds 2 and 3 go forward, it'll be very interesting to see how much learning happens from round 1 to round 2. So the openness of the submissions, I would say, is a really important feature.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I mean, I think one of the key things that we're learning as we're doing this work in Canada is also, being able to provide an opportunity for a convening of different types of stakeholders internally and externally. That's a big part of the impact that I think we're seeing when we're talking to communities, is that sometimes these conversations are sitting in silos within an IT department or, a geospatial data kind of like, shop. And so being able to convene and break down those silos of communication to be able to have a common vision around what the opportunity is. We know that decision makers in cities and public administrations are facing a lot of pressure from residents from a trust perspective. Their expectations are really high. We know that they're facing budget shortfalls, as well as facing some of the biggest challenges that they've ever faced coming to climate change. So, technology and data is weaving itself into kind of more kind of long-term strategic planning. And I think that's where the principle-based kind of approach that the Canadian government has put forward is really seeing some great impact at the moment.
Yeah, and so I'm going to go back to that space of problem definition and give a small example in Canada around the need for multi-sectoral partnerships, and I think that's relevant to the question of considerations of local governments in the smart city space. So, but it's also relevant to the significance of clear problem definition. And there's a small community in a province called Manitoba, and the name of the community is Dunbar. And that community was faced with challenges around a small body of water that was crucial to the economic sustainability of the community. There was significant local fishing and tourism associated with the lake. I believe it was a form of algae that started to form, and they needed a solution. So there was eventually a partnership with the University of Manitoba that was developed. There was significant time, took a couple of years to figure out clear problem definition. In this case, there was the requirement for a new type of passive filtration to address the pollution in the body of water. The community was very successful in coming up with a solution. It was a custom solution for that community. It was around a new form of passive filtration. There's new opportunity for the community, a small community in this context, around intellectual property associated with this new form of technology. So a couple of lessons or ideas for local government there. One, partnership, the relevance of it, not just necessarily within private sector. There's room for multi-sectoral collaboration and for the solutions that a lot of communities are looking for. So that's one. Two, the time associated with solutions often is not necessarily consistent with political timelines. It takes time to make your way through that clear problem definition stage and then get into the solution space substantively. And then three, and this is maybe a smaller piece, but I think it's incrementally more important with local governments, and it's around being, your municipal staff, leaders, city builders are increasingly in a new evolving solution space where commercialization of new technologies become a part of the day-to-day. So there's lessons to learn for local governments around IP, new IP that you're involved in developing, and what's government's role in that space around the commercialization of new technologies.
Jean-Noé, can I ask you a question that we didn't pre-plan?
Please.
We didn't pre-plan any of these. What excites you most about what's happening specifically in Canada around smart city space?
Well, I think for an international audience, it might be of interest to think about our what's happening right now in Canada around a post-colonialist kind of reconciliation context, which is obviously something very important, not just in Canada, but internationally. And so when we think about what does data sovereignty mean from Indigenous and First Nations and Métis people, there's a mobilization that's been taking place over many, many years around understanding what is data sovereignty and establishing principles around kind of possession, consent, and control over data. And so if we look at the Indigenous data sovereignty conversation and look at the data governance and data management type of conversation that's happening within cities, the principles and the topics are actually quite similar to one another. So this is where we need to be able to learn from our own history, this reconciliation process, and then kind of leverage that in a way to be able to have a much greater kind of dialogue in this post-colonialist context around data and issues surrounding technology.
Pamela, any reflections on what's exciting and or scaring you the most about what's happening?
I think on the exciting front, the thing that's interesting about the Canadian Challenge is that it's really demonstrating that governments are capable of innovation, that we're seeing good ideas come from inside government, they're government-led, and watching how Canadian municipal governments start to staff up and build their expertise in-house is going to be interesting to watch. On the challenging side, I think the hard thing that's happening right now is that this work is unfolding at a time when we're still building the data governance and the technology governance frameworks that we need. And so one of the interesting roles for the federal government, I think, will be to help accelerate the conversation about what kinds of frameworks do we need, because local governments can't be expected to make them up discreetly coast to coast to coast in Canada.
Martin, any views?
So I work for an organization called Evergreen. We've got a big tree on our business card, and it's our logo. And my whole career has essentially linked back to the environment somehow, and particularly climate action. And the government of Canada, I think, was really smart in ensuring that there was a climate lens put on the projects that are coming through the Smart Cities Challenge. So what I'm seeing, and part of the reason that I'm at Evergreen and what attracted me into the organization, is that there's an ecosystem in Canada, I think, increasingly where innovation and sustainable development, climate action are fusing, and you can really leverage a lot of new innovation. And I'm not, and this is maybe a little heretical to say at an event like this, but I'm not necessarily a technological determinist. I think that there is definitely bigger social, political, et cetera, solutions that we need to combine within our realm of technological innovation. But that relationship between sustainable development, climate action, and innovation is something that I'm seeing increasingly, not just in Canada, but around the world, and that's something that I get excited about.
Pamela, your team of researchers actually took a look specifically at what communities had put forward through this particular challenge. Were there any surprises in what you saw?
That's a bit like asking me which one of my children I love the most.
Totally, exactly what I was trying to ask.
I think, I'll say that the part that was really the most exciting was the variety of things that were submitted. If you look at the pool of 20 finalists, for example, we saw food security, we saw mobility challenges, we saw accident-free autonomous connected vehicle corridors. And all of those things were directly connected to priorities in those communities. So it wasn't so much the individual proposals that excited me, but that they were deeply rooted in the technology and the ecologies of the places they came from.
And so just to give you a sense of our process, our 4 winners that were announced last May are currently in the midst of developing their implementation plans. So we're still at the very early stages of the challenge, and we're really looking forward to seeing what our communities do and what they implement, and really looking to create some models in Canada that could be scalable across other communities. So you should absolutely follow the work that's happening in Canada, and hopefully in due course, especially given our commitment to transparency and reporting on how things are evolving, you might actually see some really neat things happening. So that concludes this part of the panel. We're going to transition, speaking of those winning communities, to another video that gives you a summary of what our 4 winners are planning to do, and then we will talk to the communities of Montreal and Guelph.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everyone.
Energy poverty is when people spend more than 10% of their available income on energy for their home and for their means of transportation.
Through community engagement, consultation, and research, we determined that 40% of our people were living in energy poverty. Recognizing that so many were facing this hardship, we set about finding innovative solutions to solve this issue and lift our citizens out of this crippling cycle. Those solutions became our Smart Cities Challenge winning plan called Energize Bridgewater. Through home retrofits and improvements, we will begin the first phase of this plan, reducing their energy costs and carbon footprint all at the same time.
The core of our program is to implement an energy management information system. Those most vulnerable who are lacking access to energy resources already are actually helped first into a more sustainable, more resilient energy future.
Our vision for the Smart Cities project is to create a series of maker spaces to make available infrastructure to promote and enable tech learning, but also to build resiliency and build positive health outcomes and the ability to just explore in a space what a community wants to explore.
Our Inuit traditional values, sort of talk about, building capable human beings. The gap that exists in sort of high-speed, high-bandwidth internet for rural and remote communities, I think sort of translates into an inability to engage with not just the rest of Canada, but I think also the rest of the world. It's about strengthening community bond. It's about allowing young people to feel sort of agency of self and to connect with their culture, to connect with their identity and feel proud of that and to learn skills and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
In Guelph, Wellington, we are working to create a regional eco-food system, bringing together farmers and researchers and entrepreneurs to create solutions to solve food problems.
So we're working with our partners from multiple sectors on 3 goals. That's to increase access to affordable, nutritious food, to create new circular businesses and collaborations, and to increase the economic and social value by transforming waste.
We know in Guelph, Wellington that 1 out of 6 families are food insecure. We also know that we waste approximately 30 to 50% of our food. That is simply not sustainable. So we are creating an regional eco-food system where everybody will have access to affordable, nutritious food, where nothing is wasted, and where we can create economic opportunities by creating new businesses and collaborations.
Afin d'identifier les projets prioritaires pour la Ville de Montréal dans le cadre du concours fédéral des villes intelligentes, la Ville de Montréal a décidé de mobiliser la communauté, soit les citoyens et également les organisations, à une grande journée de réflexion et identifier donc des projets qui étaient la priorité de la communauté. Au cours de cette journée de travail collaboratif et de consultation, nous avons été en mesure d'identifier 2 projets importants, 2 projets phares qui étaient la priorité pour la communauté. Donc, tout d'abord, d'une part, un projet de mobilité intégrée, un projet de mobilité de quartier, c'est-à-dire comment améliorer la mobilité dans les quartiers de proximité par le partage du cocktail de transport, mais aussi par le partage des données qui fait en sorte qu'on est en mesure d'améliorer et d'aider les gens qui dépendent de l'auto-solo à mieux se mouvoir dans leur quartier. Et d'un autre côté, d'identifier les problèmes d'accès à l'alimentation, donc lutter contre les déserts alimentaires et faire en sorte que les gens qui dépendent de l'auto-solo puissent avoir d'une part accès à une mobilité plus facile et faire en sorte qu'ils puissent avoir accès à une alimentation de qualité grâce à des réseaux de distribution qui sont liés également à des données ouvertes qui sont partagées. Alors l'objectif, bien entendu, de ce projet sera de faire de l'expérimentation, une expérimentation à l'intérieur du quartier, des quartiers, en engageant les citoyens, en engageant la population à participer à ce projet qui nous permettra éventuellement de pouvoir l'étendre sur l'ensemble du territoire de la Ville de Montréal, mais aussi sur l'ensemble du territoire de la communauté métropolitaine de Montréal et à la fin transformer notre très belle grande ville.
exciting stuff. We're very happy to be joined here by Montreal and by Guelph. So I'd like to introduce François Croteau. François is the mayor of Rosemont-La Petite Prairie. Patrie.
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote that wrong. And an elected official on the executive committee at the City of Montreal responsible for smart cities, innovation, and information technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, Montreal is the winner of our $50 million prize under the Smart Cities Challenge. And I'm also joined by Barb Schwarzentruber, and Barb is the Executive Director of Innovation and Intergovernmental Services, representing Guelph and Wellington County, who won one of our two $10 million prizes under the challenge. So François, I'm going to start with you.
Yep.
We learned a little bit about your project on the video, but what other features of the project are you excited about? Is there texture that you want to provide or information to the crowd here, particularly around how you're leveraging data and connected technology?
So don't worry, I'm going to speak in English. It's important to just start at the beginning of that project because it's important to talk about about people. And at the beginning, you just ask ourselves why we want to apply to that challenge. What is the goal of the city to apply that challenge? We just ask ourselves, what is the objective of a smart city? What is a smart city for citizens? What does it mean for citizens, a smart city? And of course, Montreal just started earlier, many years ago, to change its way to talk about smart city, the concept of smart city. And when we begin to brainstorm about what we want to do with that challenge, we just ask ourselves, what is the goal? And at the end, we just talk about the needs of the citizen. And we just take out of the technology, the data, and just focus of what we want to do for citizens. And after that, we just ask ourselves, is the question of the response, is that have to come from us or the citizen by themselves? So we just switch our philosophy and just put on the center of the objective of smart city for Montreal to respond to the needs of the citizen, but by the citizen. So ask to the citizen, what do you really want every day? What is your needs? And how we can help you to get a better quality of life every day in the city. So when we focus on the needs of the citizen, they change everything. And at the end, you can use the data and technology, but that's not the goal. The goal is to help citizens to get better quality of life. So what we start to do is just ask citizens on the internet, what do you want? What is the most important thing for you every day? What do you need to get that better quality of life? So we receive a thousand of response from citizens, and it's very important work for the staff and for us to just squeeze that and just focus on some topics. But there's a mainly topics who just emerge from that open conversation with the citizen is how you can have access to great food and how you can move better and faster and comfortably in the city. And so after that, we just said to ourselves, so, okay, let's talk together, just a happening with all the people who want to talk about that, face-to-face, brainstorm, discuss, talk about, and just from scratch, and just think about what is the dream of that. And in one day, we just put 200 people together and talk freely about that. And at the end, we have a lot of projects, but we continue to build and talk after that weeks ago. And then at the end, we just focus on two topics, two projects at the end. And the project was built by citizens, not by the city. That's the citizen of Montreal who decide exactly what they want. And I think that's why we win the contest, because it not come from the top, but by the bottom. And it's really important. At the end, of course, we said that how we can use it, it's by collecting data. And I think in what we heard before about governance, ethics, transparency, when citizens know exactly that the data is going to be used for their health, for the benefit of their life, they have no problem to let the data go and openly But when they don't know exactly what we're going to do with the data, I think that's the problem. And so I think that project is very successful project because it came from the citizen.
Thanks for that. Barb, what about you? What are you excited or additional details about your plans and the project in Guelph?
Yeah, well, I just want to build on that. I think it's really important for these smart city projects to build from what citizens want, but what is sort of in the DNA already of your community. So we're a mid-sized city, we're surrounded by an agricultural county, and we realized right away that the focus of our project had to be something about agri-food because that was so much a part of what all of the sectors and many of the sectors in our city and county focused on. But the challenge was, how do you find the common vision? And so we went sector by sector. We went to the university, the academic and research community. We went to the social sector. We went to the business sector. And what we found that they could all agree on that would move the work that they were already doing forward was this concept of a circular economy. So the idea of moving from a linear take, make, dispose economy to a circular one where we reduce waste, we look for ways to replenish, we look for value as well in what we now consider to be food waste. So this brought all of our community together. So we have kind of the holy grail of the business community, the academic community, the social sector, the innovation sector, and all of our citizens really focused on how can we create that kind of change. How could we create a sustainable regional food economy? So I would say that that's exciting, but it's meant that we have a very bold and ambitious vision that is focused on 9 projects that range from, doing asset mapping around where people do or don't have access to healthy food, to looking at our municipal waste systems and trying to find more circularity in them, to creating an innovation hub where we can incubate and accelerate businesses that are going to help us solve very complex food system challenges, and then an impact fund where we can provide funding and coordinate the funding ecosystem for creating those new businesses. So it's a collaborative project that looks at the social side, the economic side, as well as the environmental side, and that really has inspired our community.
Would you say that participating in this challenge program in particular brought about any change in your city, or was there a harnessing of some energy that was already there?
Yeah. For us, it was the first project that we work with the new urban lab that we created. Before, City of Montreal have a smart city office and mostly work on tech, apps, and mostly technology. And when we have that reflection about the contest, we have the same reflection about what we're going to do with the smart city office. And we decided to change all the philosophy how we work in the city of Montreal by creating a urban lab. And the goal of the urban lab is to open the wall of the city and let the city servant to work better and mostly with the community, with university, with city, with the center of research, and all the people who want to work and have some project or solution for the city, not just from the city servant, but all the people who want to try to work with us and find solutions. So that was the first test for us to see how it can work and how the city is going to accept to work with the citizen and the organization to let the solution come from outside of the city hall. And so it's very interesting for us because after that, all the services saw exactly how it works and how good it works. And so everybody just had their hands and said, oh, me too. So it works. It's going to be a culture organization changing right now. But I think we work very positively with that kind of new process in the city with all the services. I think it's a good response for citizens about confidence in the institution of Montreal City.
Barb, what about you?
Actually, I asked that question to my partners who are here with us last night, and they said that they didn't think the city could continue to do business in the same way anymore, that we will need to now have a similar kind of engagement approach with all of our partners, and that it has fundamentally changed how we work with our community. And so it has changed, it is changing, and will change the culture of the city internal to be far more externally oriented and to continue to build on the partnerships that we've created. Yeah,
That's excellent.
And I can just add something is give ourselves the right to experiment and fail.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing when you talk about with politicians. you can do mistake and you can fail at the end. It's not guaranteed that you're going to have a success. So, but if you give us a chance to experiment, do innovation on public space with citizens, I think at the end you're going very far than if you just do something more conservative. So give ourselves the chance to experiment. It's very important for us now.
And that is certainly a feature of the program as well, the understanding that in order to achieve the outcomes that your community identified in their vision, things are going to evolve. The approach, the technology, things are going to change. They might not look the same this year as they do 3 or 4 years from now because these are long-term implementations. And so there's a recognition of that sort of on the level of program design as well, that's built in and expected, which is something that's an innovation in programming in and of itself as well.
Yeah.
François, you got to practice a bit for your session this afternoon.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question that tests you on some of that. What have you learned about planning for data management at the city level as a result of this or other work you're doing?
The importance of transparency with citizen and ethic governance of the data. It's very interesting because citizens give their own personal information with the iPhone and smartphone just freely like this, and with how it comes because they get something interesting, and they're more afraid about what the city is going to do with the data, and they suspect that you're going to do something wrong with my data. But with Facebook, no matter, they give the data. And so I think the important that we have to do is how we can create confidence about what the city is going to do with the data, but in the case of an exchange for a better services. Because if you want to give you the personal information of what you need, you want something else in return to get a better quality of life or better services. I think it's a question of confidence between what the city gives in exchange of the data, of the personal information for citizens. But so when you build about better services, needs of the citizen, at the end, you can build a better trust with citizen and the city, and then build a kind of, we're working right now of a data charter from Montreal to a new governance of the data, and so to be sure that citizens are going to participate to the writing of this data charter, and then at the end probably work better with citizens. So that challenge gives us a lot of opportunity now, and we're just moving very faster than we think before. So thank you for the challenge.
Barb, did you have any reflections on data or even moving beyond that into sort of the partnerships?
Yeah, no, I do, because it's one of the most complex pieces of the puzzle that every smart city has to solve. And so for us, we started to think about the model that we want to use as being a data utility model. So in Canada, the local governments, the municipal governments are responsible for our electric utilities. They're responsible for our water utilities. And so very much like water, like electricity, those basic things that people need, data, it needs to also be treated in that way. It's a public resource, it's also an economic resource, and finding the balance between those two is very important. So we're going to be working on a data collaboration platform, but even more importantly, I think, than the technology that allows us to share data across our multi-sectors will be the data governance framework. And for that, we're looking at models like data collaborations and data trusts and how we can use that kind of a framework to build this. It's going to be one of the most important success factors, I think.
And as you're looking ahead to implementing these ambitious projects, how are you planning to confront the unexpected? Because surely things are going to arrive.
Problem of governance. In a community like Montreal, you have a lot of institutions who want to work, and we have to work with a lot of stakeholders, and some have their own objective, and so you have to conciliate all of this to be sure that you focus at the end that you want to get. And so right now we have some, experimentation with the complexity of the governance of Montreal, but it's interesting for us because we understand how it's sensible for some stakeholder and try to find solution to get our goal together and to get the goal of the community.
I think the wonderful thing about our project and many of our colleagues' projects is there are so many people around the table that when you confront the unexpected, it's so much easier to face it with the partners that have so many different perspectives on how you can move forward or see it as an opportunity and not necessarily a challenge. So I'm comforted by the fact that we are not in it alone and that we are very much, because of the nature of the challenge, we are very much able to think about it in the long term, so we can think about 5 years out and not necessarily having to solve things and do things tomorrow. Yeah.
So what are you looking most forward to in the coming year around your project?
We're working right now mostly on the integrate mobility with the solution for that, because at the end it's going to be more on the logistics center data for the foods, for the distribution. But right now we mostly work on the integration of the mobility, the gap you have between the regular system, because it's the more complex part of our challenge. And it's hard because, like I said, we had a lot of stakeholders on the metropolitan community of Montreal, a lot of institutions who's working with that. And I see some of the municipal servant here who's with me, and they know that what I'm talking about, how it's complex to work on that. And but it's very positive, because at the end we know exactly it's going to be a great success.
Well, I think we're all excited to get going. We've just been spending the last few months getting started, getting our collaborative governance model together. We have 9 projects, so we're excited for each of those to kick off and to move forward. And we're really looking forward to having results to talk about, to share with others.
So on the theme of sharing, a goal of the program is also about developing solutions that might be replicable or repeatable in other cities. Have you had conversations with other cities in Canada or other cities internationally about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's interesting because during the time that we're working and do our project, before we won, 2 cities call us to meet us and to talk about our project because they're interesting. Victoria in BC and Gatineau in Quebec, and they said to us that it's very interesting for us because we want to go in that way. And we met and we have a workout with them to talk about our project, and we exchange our experience with that cities. And it's an indication that we do the good thing with the citizen, because it's the same thing everywhere, in the same needs for citizen everywhere. So when cities call us before we win, that's an indication for us that we're probably in a good situation for the contest.
And one of the cities that called them was a city that was also competing in the challenge.
Yeah.
Canadians are really nice. They're really nice people.
true. We are.
Except in the hockey game.
We've found an affinity with many of the Nordic countries and other countries that are involved in agri-food. The Nordic countries, because a lot of the work on the circular economy concept is coming from that area. And across Canada, we are, everything we do, we're focused on how can we replicate that, how can we scale that. And so we're also committed to creating a Smart Cities playbook that'll talk about the content of our project, but also sort of the basic lesson learned around going through a smart city development and build.
Excellent. So we have a few more minutes, and I don't want to take the time talking too much about the challenge. I wondered if there was anybody in the audience that had any questions for either our previous panelists or for the cities of Guelph and Montreal. We have a mic here. I'm looking at my technicians. Is that okay if people come up with questions? But you want them to come here, right? Any questions?
Hello, my name is Lina. I come from Colombia, from a mid-sized city. And I wonder if you will be able to share this model and replicate it back in my country.
So the sharing of the experiences that are happening in the projects in Canada and whether they can be replicated in other countries.
Yeah, of course. Everything is going to be open on the web in the experimentation, and all the things, the steps of the project will be online. We have a platform to share with people exactly where we are, where we go. Probably can give the address, but you can find it very easily on the internet. And it's important for us because it's an open project. And all the data is going to be open too for the project. So for us, it's important that everybody wants to know exactly what we're doing, where we're going, to get the access every time. And especially, it's the basic of the contract that we have with the stakeholder. Everybody has to work as an open, project, open data. So all the information is on the web.
Yeah, same for us.
So part of what we've engendered and mandated in the challenge is that openness, with the goal of if we do and when we do develop great solutions in Canada, if they have applicability in other cities in Canada or other cities around the world, that people will be able to actually look to those for inspiration around how to implement solutions. Thank you for the question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yuval. I'm from Israel. And my question is regarding what Barbara said before about data. Data is a utility. And my question is, since one of the main problems of data or municipal data is the fact that it's really unstructured and diverse, do you cooperate between cities in Canada to make sure that the data sets that you're sharing have the same standards?
Oh, huge question.
Jean away. Jean away. Do you want to give it to Jean away?
Yeah.
Just give it away.
Give
it
Phone a friend.
Working? Okay, good. Yeah, so part of the work that we're doing as part of the challenge, but in parallel to that, is doing capacity building for communities. And so we're offering a series of online courses, basic and advanced, for IT leaders within the communities themselves, as well as elected officials and decision makers. And so we have a few courses that are on like data standards, data interoperability, as well as open data. So we deal with this issue on like a one-to-one basis, but then the more cities that we work with, the more we're able to strengthen the interoperability of the lessons that we're learning as well. So it's obviously a complex set of issues. Part of the main challenge, I think, is knowing which standards are out there, right? Because many cities or many stakeholders they're like, oh, I need a standard, and then they start developing a new standard. So, right, so like the discoverability of what standards are out there. So part of our work is not necessarily to structure the data for cities, but informing them of what standards already exist so that we can connect the dots, between cities. A good example for that would be open procurement or open contracting. And that's where we leverage international partnerships like the Open Contracting Partnership internationally, which already does this work around the world. And so we're partnering with them to develop workshops and webinars as well. Yeah.
And what is complex too is the capacity of cities to go forward with that kind of project, because we're not equal in that work. Of course, smaller cities don't have the same capacity than Montreal to adopt a larger scope of politics and standards. So right now what we're doing is under the Union of Municipalities of Quebec province, we try to link the bigger city together and then just drop down all the standards and the information. So to work together, they give us a standard in Quebec. After that, work with the Federal Municipality Coalition, and to be sure that we have same kind of standard, because the other complexity is the culture is very different from east to west in Canada. So it's important to work with the diversity too. So in Quebec, it's a province of Quebec is the same thing. Montreal is a multicultural city, but if you're going in some part of the Quebec, it's not very multicultural. So the culture is very different, the philosophy is different, but I think you can work with some standards to share with smaller city. That's what we're doing right now, and I think Montreal can have a role of leader in Quebec to be sure that the metropole is working with smaller city, and they're hoping to work with us, and they're very happy that Montreal wants to share their experience with them. And after that, we work with some Canadian city too. And like I said, the culture is very different. If you take, for example, what Toronto did with sidewalk project and what Montreal is doing right now, it's very opposite. And it's important to respect that kind of difference.
Any other questions from the audience? Anyone? No? So just a plug for our transparency and the openness. All of the communities who applied to the Smart Cities Challenge, so the 130 applicants, information about those applications remain online. So many of these communities have now developed a vision for how to implement a Smart Cities approach in their community, and didn't receive funding to do that. And so they're open for a partnership, certainly, and a very interesting source of information for people who want to take a look at what the level and scale of ambition in Canada looked like in our first round. And then the 20 finalists, of which 4 were chosen as winners, their full applications are also online. So if you are interested in learning more about what Canadian communities are grappling with and what their priorities are, there's a really rich source of information there on the Infrastructure Canada website. You just search Smart Cities Challenge. And we are represented at the Canada Pavilion over in Hall 2. Please feel free to come and visit us if you want to learn more about what we're doing, or just find out really how nice your Canadian friends are. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it.